Do you have SIBO and want to learn how to help yourself? The SIBO Success Plan is now available from thesibodoctor.com. In this highly anticipated plan, you'll learn my tried and proven method to treat SIBO, including home treatments, online dispensary guides, diet handouts, and much, much more. Already being treated by a practitioner? No problem. The SIBO Success Plan is designed as a standalone program or to work under the care of a practitioner. Become a SIBO-savvy patient and beat SIBO for good. For more info, go to www.thesibodoctor.com. Welcome back to part 2 of the SIBO Doctor podcast, and let's jump right back into it. So one of the other aspects of your course, you really do a great job with again, it's a course for practitioners, and we'll talk more about it at the end. And all of the contact details and Dr. Crista's website and the link to the course will be in the show notes for those of you listening, your practitioners. It's a really fantastic course that I highly recommend, because I think we're all missing mold, all the time. Especially when I was going through, when you do courses, when you're just expanding your knowledge on a different topic, you're like, oh my God, that was that patient. Yeah. Oh my God, that was that patient. Right. It happens.
Yes. And that's why I developed a clinical questionnaire, which you get with the course, as a way of sort of scoring people, because, I had that same experience that after my patient, when they found black mold in his house, and I started researching on mycotoxins and what it does to animals, I looked at my other patients. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm missing. And that person. And that MS case that doesn't fit in any box. And there were so many cases that I just thought, how have I been missing this? And you do, because we don't understand.
Well, one of the things that I have always appreciated about SIBO as a condition is that it is so central to so many different aspects and has so many underlying potential conditions, like, for example, POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, that mentioned on this program before, which is a real dysautonomia, dysregulation of your autonomic nervous system that we often see with SIBO. But I can see the similarities there with mold toxicity, and a patient that I saw that had cyclical vomiting because of that. I'm thinking, oh my God, this probably was a huge component, right?
Right. And it's so common that SIBO is a next step of a mold toxic person, and vice versa. If they had SIBO and they went into that water damage exposure with already a compromised gut and motility issues and that kind of thing, they are just ripe for mold to move in and wreak havoc. So there's so much correlation between the two. It's just amazing.
So for all of you listening that are patients, I recommend getting the book Break the Mold or Breaking the Mold?
Break the Mold.
Break the Mold. That'll also give you some tips on how to clean up your own environment, so to speak. But of all the, of all the tools you teach in your course, what do you find are the most specific to SIBO?
Cholagogues. And I know that I'm taking your course and loving it. I just can't believe how many times when you've said bile acids, my little ears just perk right up, because I'm such a bilophile. Is that a term? Bilophile. I just made it now. Yeah, I have a whole section in my course called A Treatise on Bile, because I am so in love with it. I think it's one of the most underappreciated bodily fluids, and it's so critical for restoration of these conditions. So I would say cholagogues are, if not one of the most important, other than the antifungals, once you can use them, it's one of the most important things that you can do for a mold sick patient, especially if they have that correlative mold toxicity SIBO situation. Because what I've learned from your course is that the bacteria endotoxins are toxic to bile acids. So you now have an impaired ability to detoxify mold toxins, because we use bile to detoxify mold toxins. So now you've got that feedback loop that's just a catch-22.
Or you're damaging bile acids that are dumped into the small intestine and liberating mycotoxins. And then absorbing it through an impaired, small intestinal wall. So yeah, it's definitely far-reaching. One of the And just to clarify, cholagogues are herbs that tend to move or aid in the movement of bile through the liver into the gallbladder and kind of liquefying bile, because a lot of people have very sludgy bile. There's also an aspect of what we call phase 3 detoxification, which is that last part of where a toxin has made it all the way through your liver, phase 1 and phase 2. And then phase 3 is actually the movement of that toxin into the bile. And there are also aspects, I think you mentioned it in your course, of mycotoxins impairing that. So bile is really, really important. Now, what I don't want to have people do is just buying ox bile willy-nilly, because there are aspects to when you don't want to use it, right? So you don't really want to use bile acids when you have a hydrogen sulfide condition. So, for example, hydrogen sulfide is produced predominantly by hydrogen sulfide producers like desulfovibrio and, actually, Bilophila wadsworthia. There's your word. There's your bug.
That's a good one.
Bilophila. You are a Bilophila. And that's a bile-loving organism in and of itself, not harmful. But when you have an overgrowth of that, you can have an overgrowth of hydrogen sulfide producers, which can worsen your inflammation. So it's always a Goldilocks kind of thing, isn't it? Like,
yes, that just explained a couple of cases actually that didn't make sense. So that's how I need to finish your course.
There's a lot. It's so amazing, the overlap of what we learn from each other when we compare notes, right?
And there's no way to know everything. No. That's the thing. It's like I know Definitely what I know, not. And I can't wait to learn more. Yeah. So in that note that you had asked what makes my protocol different than Dr. Shoemaker, there's a really strong emphasis on binders in his protocol. So that's the step 1, I think, of his protocol. Again, I'm not Shoemaker trained, so I know it's an important step, but I don't know where it falls. And I have had people come to me that have been on binders, pharmaceutical binders, for years, and they now have nutrient deficiencies for making fresh bile. So by binding too much bile, and in a pharmaceutical way, you can actually create fat-soluble nutrient deficiencies, which are exactly the things you need in your nervous system to protect your body from the mycotoxins. So putting back vitamin A, D, E, K, CoQ10, essential fatty acids, putting back glycine and taurine, which are required to conjugate to make a bile acid. Those are some of the nutrients that some people are coming to me with that have been on long-term pharmaceutical binders. And so that's one of the things that's different, is that in the fundamentals, as a naturopathic doctor, we are having people eat a ton more vegetables than they ever did, I'm sure. My goal is 5 to 7 servings of veggies, not just fruit, veggies, and non-starchy veggies, ideally, the bulk of those. And by doing that, we're able to bind a lot of those bile acids just through diet. And then all you need to add is a little insoluble fiber. And that is actually, and that might be where the SIBO people, I mean, you let me know, again, I haven't finished your course yet, but in my experience with treating people with SIBO, that can get a little dicey to add in those fibers. So there are things that are binders that are naturally very good binders of bile, and that are just food and don't necessarily aggravate somebody that can't tolerate certain carbohydrates, and that's steamed kale. There's a great study that showed that it was better than raw kale. Steamed kale is great at binding bile. So in my view, I'm thinking, well, I already use binders, but I'm using food binders, so that's already sort of part of my protocol. It's just not, one of those, it's not a pharmaceutical.
That's really interesting, because kale is not really a very high FODMAP fiber. It must be just very high cellulose type of thing, so, and it is on the biphasic diet allowed. So that's good news, people.
I know, it's a nice crossover.
So kale, we love it. Okay. So we've gotten a little taste of some of your treatment approaches. You also mentioned in your experience in the course about Saccharomyces boulardii, which is we like Saccharomyces boulardii as a beneficial yeast that has numerous beneficial effects on restoring the microbiome, mainly by outcrowding candida, by also improving the adherence of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium to the mucosa. So that's another benefit. And it also raises secretory IgA. So But what I loved was that you said that you see people react, I think, to SB or Saccharomyces boulardii. I have seen this, and I
Yes.
didn't. I just thought it was candida or like a yeast allergy.
Yeah, or it gets blamed as a die-off reaction. And actually, the way that I see it is that if I use Saccharomyces boulardii, but not in mold sick patients. I use it for people who have frank candidiasis. Their diet is terrible, or something like that. There's something going on where they have it's just candida. There's no water damage exposure. There's no mold. When it now tips over into that idea of the mycotoxins triggering protective effects, and now your own microbes acting like bad guys, the candida is possibly a protective effect, protecting the body from some of these more severe species. So by knocking them out, you've not only increased, with Saccharomyces boulardii, you not only increased the body's total fungal burden, you've now potentially taken away one of their protective line, or it's protecting the lining. And we don't think of candida that way because we're always talking about it as a problem child. But if it was only a problem child, it wouldn't be natural and symbiotic in the gut in normal percentages. So I'm wondering, I'm just posing that. I don't know if that's a thing, but I have noticed that when you add Saccharomyces boulardii, it's just too much yeast. It's too much fungal overburden, and the body is already trying to deal with that.
Well, and a lot of, I think, brewer's yeast, right? I mean, whenever I do food allergy panels, a lot of people have allergies to brewer's yeast. Brewer's. So, which also is a Saccharomyces species, I believe.
Yeah.
So, I think fungus is really a big issue. And so this whole mold theme really is just another aspect of dealing with mold or fungal elements, I guess I should say. Different to candida, but I've seen a lot of people really improve with prolonged candida treatment. In my experience, most practitioners just don't do it long enough. Or maybe not most, but many practitioners that are just not, like a 6-week course of oregano oil is not going to do it, So
I'm with you completely. They're very tenacious and they're networked. If you look at fungal species in nature, there's a whole web underneath the soil. And that's how they work with our gut too. They're very networked. So just thinking that you're going to take off the top layer is ridiculous. That's just the flowering parts. That's basically, you've just mowed. You haven't really derooted it. So you have to stay with it,
That's a good analogy. Okay. So, I'm thinking of the people that are listening to this that are like, okay, I have SIBO, or practitioners listening saying, yes, okay, that makes sense. I have a lot of patients who are not improving, even though they are or maybe just not enough improvement after SIBO treatment. So what do you recommend? Let's start with the patients that are listening. What do you recommend? Where can people start? Where can people get tested for mycotoxins? I know that I use the Great Plains lab that you've been recommending.
There's also a lab called Vibrant Wellness. I don't know if they're available in Australia. So there are a couple that use the type of technology that I'm finding most reliable, and that's mass spec. So both Great Plains Lab and Vibrant Wellness use that technology. Yeah, so mycotoxin testing is one of my data points. It's not going to be the end-all be-all, because then we also need to look at how's their immune function and, do a stool test and maybe an organic acids test and know their glutathione status. You may not be able to detoxify these mycotoxins and even get them to where the urine can take them out. So urine mycotoxins are a great data point just to see, what is their load. The problem is it doesn't tell you, is that a now exposure or a past exposure? So that's why you need other data points. I also like to look at NK or natural killer cell function, which is given in lytic units, and you want this above 7 and ideally above 10. So if somebody is down 7 or below, their natural killer cell function is flatlined, which means their immune function is flatlined. And the next thing that we see after that is T and B cell deficiencies. So NK cells is kind of where it starts with the soldiers on the ground, with our innate immune system, and then it starts to drop off from there. So that's another nice data point. You can run a CBC and you can look for, often we'll see a low white count. You can see if somebody has had, if you have data on them with a differential, and now they're starting to display a little bit of lymphopenia or neutrophilia, a little eosinophilia. So some of those things that you're like, what's going on with their white count? Oh, maybe they were just sick, or maybe it was just a viral something. Well, it could actually also be mold. So some of those data points are really nice to see. And commonly, I'll see liver enzymes start to go on the rise. So it's just like an alcoholic. And that's one of the stories I put in my book. I had a patient that never touched a drop of alcohol. Religiously, it was not allowed in his belief system. And his doctor kept saying, well, you need to stop drinking. You need to stop drinking. And it's because his GGT was high. And he had NASH. So he had, the whole inflammatory, which is very correlative with mold exposure. And I think also SIBO, yes? The non-alcoholic steatohepatitis.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this was all going on for him, and they came to see me. They're like, "Nobody's listening to us. You have to help us." And it turned out he was being poisoned by his air conditioning unit in the window of his office. So he had mold toxicity. So I'll look at liver enzymes because we will see them start to creep. And I always run a GGT. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, well, if it's high, it's just fatty liver and blah blah blah." And I'm thinking, "Whoa, why? Why is there a fatty liver? What's going on?" So let's investigate.
So getting back to your mycotoxin data or like the lab, because I'm about to do one because I did have a leak in my roof, right? So I'm a prime candidate, although I don't display. I just want to know. So you mentioned that that's more like, why is that only a marker for past or like any exposure in the past? I thought you would just kind of detoxify mycotoxins as you're exposed to them if you have good clearance.
That is such a good question. And that's something that I really want people to come away understanding, that if you have had exposure to a water damaged building and the mycotoxins of that pathogenic biofilm, when that survival trigger happens in your internal environment, you now have something called colonization, which is where your own flora now are toxing yourself. They're basically poisoning yourself because they're now competing with all the other flora in your body. So what happens with that past exposure is that everybody now is starting to act competitively, and they're actively spitting out mycotoxins even if they are out of the environment.
Right. Okay. So, right. I have other questions about that, but it might complicate things. So we'll leave it at that.
It also can be a stored load, because mycotoxins are lipophilic. It's a very important thing to know about them, because then it helps you understand what type of tissues they're impacting and why it's so hard to get rid of them. So we've actually seen when we do a urine mycotoxin test before a sauna, and then after sauna, and up to 3 hours after the sauna, you can see the urine mycotoxins go up tenfold.
Wow.
So there is something that we're able to detox them. That's a good thing. But that doesn't tell us anything in the urine mycotoxin test. So I actually have a pre-test worksheet or guidelines that takes out some of the questions that we ask then as we're staring at that result. One of the questions is, did they just eat it? Is it just because they ate this mycotoxin, now they're peeing it out? So I have a no food list that I have people stay away from for 3 days before they take the test, to sort of minimize that weakness of the test. Because absolutely, if you're eating it, it can show up in your urine, if you're able to.
Okay. And what do you think about these like mold plates that people can buy to detect any sort of mold activity in their house?
That's a good question. So I'm much more a body expert than a building expert, but I've had a lot of experience with, helping patients navigate that. And I think it's important for clinicians to get the vocabulary and know what's out there and know what's a good test and a bad test, because you will be in the position of navigating that with your patient. The mold plates are simply a screen. It only grows out 10% of the molds. The auger will miss 90% of the indoor toxic molds. They just don't grow on that medium. So if you grow out a lot of mold on that, your home is sick, or your office or whatever. So I take it as, if it's positive, it's positive. Time to call somebody. If it's negative, not necessarily negative. because it may be that there's just not that species around.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're only looking at 10% of the population, you could really miss it. Also, random air sampling is terrible because somebody could have just walked through that room or, rustled up the carpet or plopped on the couch or those kind of things. And so you might get a moment in time, but it's not telling you a lot about the health of that building, because most of the time these are trapped behind building materials. So the spores are not necessarily poofing around in the air. They're going to be behind that building material, but the mycotoxins are getting through that building material and making the indoor air poisonous. So I like mycotoxin testing for homes, for buildings in general, because it does tell you sort of a total load. It may be forensic. It's the same problem as in a body. You don't know now, was there a problem and it's just left over in the dust and the particulate that we're picking up, or is there an active problem? So doing a kind of routine mycotoxin testing of your built space is really nice because you can kind of watch those levels.
Okay, great advice. So now let's move into where people can find your book and also the practitioner course that we continue to reference. So tell us about the course first. What's made you produce this? What did you say? 8 hours worth of
8 hours
mold education.
Put on your seatbelt, get cozy. So it was just hard for me to see all of these people suffering. I can write a book, and there are lots of things in the book that people can do on their own and get started, and it helps a lot of people. But there are people who really need practitioners. And after you write a book, then you get everybody coming to you saying, would you see me as a patient? And it's just not possible. And I think that my approach as naturopathic doctors, our approach to it is so different. And there wasn't another approach that was out there. I didn't see anybody talking about it. And so, and I have done so much homework on this that I realized, not just to write the book, but just for my patients, it became sort of a passion. And then when my own home became sick, it became more of a passion. And I thought, I think rather than going fishing with doctors, I want to teach them how to fish. So I'm doing a lot of consulting with other practitioners, and I just thought, we have the tools. We know what to do. It's just somebody needs to tell you what the mechanisms are, why certain protocols are done, why certain things are used for treatment. And then once you have that, you can take it and run with it.
Great. And as a fellow educator, I've taken your course. I haven't finished it yet.
Thank you.
I will say that. But I do appreciate the amount of information that you share, and I really do feel like when you take it, you leave really understanding how to identify it, especially some of the blood work that you mentioned, the labs, and it just makes it really easy to have a sort of a path laid out in front of you. And that's, as a fellow educator, we always try to do for our practitioners. And so I do really highly recommend people at least have a look at it. And again, that link is in the show notes. And the book, I think people can just order it online.
Yeah, Amazon. Yep.
Amazon.
And for listeners that are in Australia, you can get the ebook there.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah. So you can still have access to it, even though I'm a US doc.
Right. And the course you get actually then certified, and you, I think you have a database or so people can find mold treating practitioners.
Licensed practitioners can become mold literate certified. And the course is backed by over 250 scientific references. So you're walking away with a really robust, scientifically rigorous course. And then we will put you on our website. I would love to add more people there, because we have so many people coming to my website saying, help me. There's not someone in my area. There are big swaths of the country, and we have people in the UK, we have people in Greece, we have people in all kinds of countries. Mold is everywhere. Canada, so like I said, it is your built environment, not your outdoor environment, that makes the difference. So, we need mold treating doctors and practitioners everywhere. So we will put you on our website, and patients can find you there.
Great. I think we have the same sort of demographic, because we get daily requests in our Facebook groups. And
Sure.
For those of you listening and you haven't had a chance to check out the SIBO Lifestyle Facebook group or the SIBO Doctor Practitioner Forum, we have that all in it. All over the world, people are desperate for SIBO treating practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's such a great, very synergistic, our approaches.
Yes.
And I think people do need to know as part of their toolbox that this condition really exists and is very, very, very common and can very much impact how patients respond to SIBO treatment and vice versa, really. So
yes. Yeah, it would be sort of fascinating to see the things that I'm recommending that can actually hurt a SIBO person. That's why I'm taking your course, because I want to understand the things those nuances, of how to make sure we're not making people worse, because we see them together so often.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Crista, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure we can come up with way more questions, but there is a time limit. And for those of you listening and you want to get in touch with, or you want to know more about Dr. Crista, all of the information about her website, her social media links, Instagram, the practitioner course will all be on the show notes on this episode. So you just go to thesibodoctor.com and go to podcast, and it'll all be listed right there. Any last minute nuggets of wisdom from you?
Yes, I would say both for practitioners and patients, trust yourself. That's one of the things I see mold really wreck people's faith and their own intuition. If you feel like there's a problem area, or you are wondering and that your intuition is saying, I think it's mold, I think there's something wrong, trust that.
That's a really good point. And I think a lot of people have also lost faith in the medical establishment or community. There's a lot of abuse that's been going on and a lot of dismissive behavior by medical doctors, but also by other practitioners if they don't know a condition. And I think you and I are examples of that. We never stop learning. We're taking each other's courses right now. I'm saying, oh my God, there's so much more, right?
Yes.
So that's what I would say
more.
is never stop learning, because it's an evolving field with our changing world, our changing environments. There's all sorts of things that we need to be informed on. So I thank you very much for being a guest on this podcast.
Thank you. And thank you for all your work. I'm really thrilled to be on.
Thank you for listening to the SIBO Doctor podcast. We hope you found the information in this episode useful in the treatment of your SIBO patients. Thanks to our sponsors, SIBOtest.com, a breath testing service with easy online ordering, and Quintron, maker of outstanding breath testing equipment. Tune in again for another episode of the SIBO Doctor podcast. Thanks again for listening.